to think that you're giving away 2 hours basically for free.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
no job in the world does that except for trucking.
You sound defeated there. LandLine now, welcome back. The OOIDA Foundation is out with 2 brand new surveys, one on detention time and another on freight rates. Both are thorough and both are important for a variety of reasons. And Andrew King, the foundation's assistant director, is here to explain why. Andrew, good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. As always, we always learn something new every time you grace us with your presence here. We're going to take these surveys one by one here. We'll do our best to kind of summarize them because, as I said, they are quite thorough. They are quite extensive.
Yes.
We got a lot of information here to parse through. Let's start with the 2023 survey on detention time, a problem, as we know, that weighs down the industry in a number of ways. You got responses from more than 250 OOIDA members to compile all this data. Let's start with, I guess, the most obvious and basic question here is how much time were the respondents spending on average waiting to load or unload each week?
Yes, and we actually did something a little bit different to give an actual number rather than in previous surveys. We've kind of given just a bucket or a range of hours. And for loading time, it was 7.2 hours per week. And then for unloading time, it was 7.1 hours. So adding that together, our average member is spending approximately 14.3 hours every week in detention, which is quite considerable when you think of the hours of service regulations, which is why this is really problematic. I mean, it's problematic in other ways, but when you only have 60, 70 hours of driving time and you're losing driving time being stuck, and how that can trickle down and just affect everything.
Yeah, it really does, and we've obviously talked about this in recent months about this issue, and it seems like there's more attention to it now, and hopefully we'll get better results in the future when you do this survey. We were talking earlier, looking at that, 14.3, I think it was, right? The average there. That's actually down a little bit compared to recent years, but you have to take the pandemic into consideration there.
Yes, and that is a very interesting finding, probably to me anyway. When I look at this survey, that was the most interesting thing, is that in 2020 and 2021, the average time spent in detention was 16.1 hours, I believe. So it's a little bit of a reduction, about 11% lower, and then it's even 4.7% lower than it was in 2022. So that is a good sign, but obviously 14 hours is still a lot of time. So it's nice that it dropped, but it's still a major issue.
And one thing I thought was interesting, again, you ask so many questions in this survey, and it really does paint a pretty good picture of what the problem is out there. One thing I found interesting was that a vast majority of the people who responded to the survey kind of took issue with the way detention time is defined, right? Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, and that's always been a really hot button issue. So 90% were in disagreement with the traditional definition, which I'm not exactly sure how that became the definition. We believe that it had something to do back with deregulation in 1980. But basically, there's this idea that detention doesn't start until after you're there for 2 hours. And so that's what, like in the OIG report, they called it dwell time. And, to think that you're giving away 2 hours basically for free. I mean, no job in the world does that except for trucking.
You sound defeated there, Andrew.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Now, and our members are fair. They'll write, because we ask them to expound on this and give them the option to kind of put in like an open text question, right? And a lot of them are reasonable in that some things do take a little time to load, unload, and they expect that to an extent. But when it becomes even more than 30 minutes or an hour and you don't hold true to your appointment times, that's pretty frustrating. Yeah,
I mean, there are such things as, money makers. This is quite literally a money loser, as you kind of point out there. One thing I thought was interesting too, and again, we're just kind of going through these one by one here, but I think it was about half of those who responded here said they do try to get paid, right, for detention time.
Yes.
Some do, but overall, most of them don't here, which again,
they
is
at
part
least
of the
try. 49% always attempt to receive compensation, and I believe It's more around 11, 12% that don't receive it at all. And then, but the thing to remember is even though some do get it, they don't receive it for all the loads that they haul, and they're not getting nearly what they believe they should be getting paid. So like for owner-operators, the average detention time pay would work out to about $53 an hour. But again, if that's not starting right away and you're not always getting that every time, and even that does not possibly cover the expense of, you might have missed a load because you were stuck.
Yeah, you couldn't,
So that, it's not really compensating for all the things that they're losing.
So I think you and I and everybody listening here probably understands the problem with this, the issue, and just how big a problem it is. You do name some names here in terms of shippers and receivers who are kind of notorious for not valuing a truck driver's time. I don't know if you want to get into that necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, they're usually the same.
Yeah.
We ask a question of what's the top 3 shippers and receivers that give you problems. Walmart, for both categories, is always number 1.
Shocking, yeah.
Yeah, very shocking.
Yeah.
And then it's usually the same other carriers. They might just switch between number 2 and number 3 here and there. But, your typical culprits are like Tyson, Americold, Target, Cisco. I mean, they're those big, well-known chains. And
those names are not going to surprise many people out there.
Exactly.
Real quick here before we move on to the freight rate survey, just in terms of understanding the problem, which this helps us do quite a bit. Solutions, are there ideas out there that you got from people about maybe how to make the situation any better? It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a hard thing. I mean, the two that come up the most probably when we ask this question is ELDs. I mean, people don't like ELDs, obviously, but they can use it to their advantage in that they can track detention time. The other thing is making it mandatory on like the bill of lading, where you put in the in and out time so that you have that documentation. And then, of course, having some form of accountability for shippers and receivers, because basically, you're just a free warehouse for them.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to make them hurt somewhere in their pocketbook, obviously, is the biggest thing. So something along those lines is what they envision.
All right, we'll move from the overwhelmingly optimistic detention time survey to the freight rate survey. I say that sarcastically because, as we know, 2023, not really a great year for rates, I should say. Anyone listening to this right now knows that all too well. You heard back on this survey from a couple hundred respondents. Since we kind of know what the numbers are from 2023 as a whole, what are you looking for from this survey in particular? What was the goal here? Or what is the goal, I guess?
I guess it's really just to know what's going on out on the road from our members' perspective, and especially for owner-operators and leased-on owner-operators. We've been sharing now for a while our monthly market update and our quarterly market update, and those are nice and they're helpful, but they're kind of broad, and they're usually taking it from a large carrier perspective or contract rate perspective, and that doesn't always fit our members. And so hearing directly from them is always the goal, and to see how that kind of matches up with other things that we see out there. And of course, as you kind of mentioned, it does match up very well. Obviously, there was decrease in rates per mile and per trip. And that was across the board, every type of operation, no matter what you were pulling or hauling. Basically, everyone was seeing a decrease, some more than others, but that was kind of the message from the survey.
Can you kind of run through those numbers real quick for us?
Yeah, just a couple. For owner-operators under their own authority, when it comes to per mile pay, they dropped 15% to $2.50 in 2023. That was the highest per mile pay for all the different types of operation. But that was still 18% higher than 2019, which is kind of matching up with other things. And $2.50, that's higher than what we see DAT reporting for van and flatbed and reefer. So that is, while it's not the greatest, I imagine our members tend to do maybe better than the average driver out there or carrier, and that just kind of highlights that. For company drivers, they decreased pay per mile by 11%, dropping down to 64 cents per mile. And then looking at overall pay, that decreased 18% from $2.56 in 2022 to to $2.09 in 2023.
Yeah, not great overall,
No.
as we already knew kind of there.
No.
We talk all the time about cost of operations, knowing what your cost of operations is, really the first step to weathering a storm like we've been seeing over the past, whatever it is, year or two. With that in mind, it was somewhat disappointing for me to see that the percentage of people who know their cost of operations actually went down last year.
Yes, that is discouraging. It's kind of disappointing, and shocking, really, because it was around 90%. It dropped down to 82%, which is still significant, but yet that drop is also significant. But the good takeaway, and this is something that helps us because we're always preaching about the importance of cost of operations and what it can do to help you. And now we have data to really show that, as same with other surveys. But one good note is that the cost of operating did drop about 30 cents from $2.38 to $2.08, which is positive, but it's still really high. But the one thing that really stands out is that those who knew their cost of operations make 67 cents more per mile, or $715 more per trip.
That's significant.
That's really significant.
Yeah.
And so that really helps us in our messaging on why it's so important to know this. I imagine for some it's like, oh, why do I need to do this? And it's such a hassle. But it can pay dividends in just knowing what you need to make. And people, I think, who track this are also probably a little better about negotiating as well.
Yeah, that would make sense. As I said earlier, both these reports and this one also are just, chock full of information, numbers. A lot of valuable information, helpful information for people out there. You talked about this kind of surprising you, maybe the cost of operations. Anything else that stands out to you here that maybe you think people should know out there about what you found out about freight rates?
Those are really the big ones. Okay. Obviously, a reduction in loads, reduction in miles traveled, especially when we removed fleet owners from the equation. And there was even a slight reduction in deadhead miles, which that's always a good thing. But there was a pretty significant reduction in loaded miles, which just basically shows, again, that demand has waned. And so there aren't as many loads out there to haul. And that's really impacting our members.
It's going to be interesting, too, when we look ahead to this year, 2024, maybe a year from now when you're looking at this, to see where we stand there. Because as we've talked about, hopefully this is the year that things start to turn around.
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting looking back at the previous year's survey because there was some hope, some optimism that things would change relatively quickly. And it's kind of interesting to think that was kind of the consensus of people in general. Even some of the freight economists, they're thinking that this freight recession would come back really quickly. We'd snap out of it. And that definitely
has not been the case.
And so it's interesting, making these predictions for 2024 and seeing exactly what you said, how they play out and if they do. So there is some optimism looking forward into the year, but it's going to be a slow progress.
Real quick here, Andrew, as we wrap things up, Truck to Success coming back this October. What can you tell us?
Yes. So the registration is already available. It's going to take place October 22nd through the 24th, and we're super excited for this. And we're having some extra specials for those who sign up early, or even those who sign up at Matt's or at the truck, where they'll have $100 off. But we're really, really looking forward to having this and seeing everybody again. And, of course, we'll hold it in person and also via Zoom. So I'm sure that we'll have more to say about this in the future, where we can talk in more detail about what to expect.
Absolutely, yeah. Cost of operations, if you want to figure out how to do that.
The
seminars for that. It's for everything and more in between. So we'll talk about that over the coming months. Andrew, a pleasure as always. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You can check out these surveys and any number of reports from the OOIDA Foundation on their website, ooida.com/foundation. I'm Scott Thompson. This is Landline Now, and we're back in a moment.